Okay, it's great to be back. We had a couple of months off without any presentations, and it's good to see so many familiar faces, and it's good to see some unfamiliar faces tonight. Hopefully this will be an educational and entertaining presentation. The 1916 committee got together back in 2014 to prepare for the 100th anniversary of the Easter Rising. We did many different things, and we won't have to go over all of that, but on the 100th anniversary, April 24th, 2016, there was a monument erected downtown Providence at the Irish Family Memorial, and we had a great event down there that day, very well attended, and we spoke about the martyrs of 1916, we spoke about the struggle for a united Ireland, and then we kind of moved on, and we tried to do other educational things. We've looked at many different aspects of Irish history since then. But we had an amazing thing happen shortly after that 100th anniversary. 2 months after that day, there was a vote in the United Kingdom called Brexit. And in a remarkable turn of events, it has put the partition of Ireland back into the news, back into the subject of conversation, both in London and Dublin and Belfast and in Washington. And tonight we're going to try to give you some idea of the background of all of that and hopefully end up with an opportunity for you to participate in pressuring the situation so that the people of Ireland are not at a loss because of the decision that was made in the United Kingdom. What I'm going to try to do tonight is give you an outline and a background of Brexit, what it was, how it works. I'm going to touch briefly on the Good Friday Agreement, which is affected by this decision. I'm going to try to talk about the potential effect of Brexit on the country of Ireland. I'm going to try to talk about the potential effect on the north of Ireland. And we're going to talk, mostly Marie, about how Americans can perhaps become active and work to help a softer landing for Ireland. But to get to it, Brexit was a vote taken in the United Kingdom that approved Britain leaving the European Union. It was a referendum called by David Cameron, who was the Prime Minister at the time. He was the head of the Conservative Party. And basically, he was fulfilling a campaign promise to conservative elements in the party who felt that the United Kingdom would be better off outside of the European Union. So he kept his promise. And there have always been objections to the UK being in the European Union, going back to 1973 when they joined. And the questions haven't changed that much. They were just people who were very much against losing the autonomy of the country. It was so strong that the United Kingdom was the only country that didn't join the euro currency. They stayed with the pound sterling. And anyone who's been in the Republic and went into the North knows that you had to change your money when you got there. There were other concerns, though, besides the loss of autonomy, that people were always very much objecting to the regulations that came down from the European Union. Regulations on food, regulations on labor, regulations on services that were rendered. And there was a good movement against it at all times. A key issue that came up later was immigration. In 1989, with the fall of the Soviet Union and those former Soviets becoming members of the EU, it meant that many Eastern Europeans migrated to England, to Ireland, and to Spain and France in the search of better employment, a better life. And there was a strong reaction, a nativist reaction in the United Kingdom among certain people that they were becoming less British. These people weren't members of the Church of England, they wore funny clothes, and they didn't mesh into the culture. And that was one of the things that caused this vote to take place and to be passed. The biggest advantage, of course, though, for the United Kingdom being in the European Union was that there's a single market, and they could trade with all those countries with single rules, and they could travel the countries, and so could the people and things like that. We don't want to go into too much details, but that was some of the argument that went forward. So on June 23rd, 2016, there was a referendum across the United Kingdom. 51.9% of people in the United Kingdom voted to leave. 48.1% voted to remain, but only 72% of the eligible voters actually voted. So that's a pretty razor-thin margin. But once the votes were counted, there was no turning back. The Conservative Party felt they had an obligation to the people that they convinced that they'd be better off leaving. They voted that way and they left. Once that decision was made and the Conservative Party started negotiating with the European Union, what is described as the divorce procedure was put into effect. Committees were formed from the European Union and from the United Kingdom, and they met to discuss exactly how this Brexit would take place. It was decided there'd be two stages. The first stage took place from May 2017 to November 2017. There were three main topics. The first was the financial commitment that the UK owed to the European Union. In other words, they negotiated a payment from the United Kingdom for the money that they weren't going to be putting in, for the money that was going to the United Kingdom, and it came out to like 32 billion pounds is what has to be paid over the course of, I think, 6 years. So they agreed, though, that that was fair. The European Union accepted it, the UK said, we'll do it. The second item was the security of European Union citizens who were living in the United Kingdom now. And the European Union wanted them to be guaranteed lifelong citizenship in the UK after the Brexit. So this was a little bit of a contentious issue because of what I was speaking about before with the immigration. Part of the deal, though, was that any UK citizen who was living in a European Union country and working would have the same lifelong protections as citizens in that country. So that worked out. The third, and to us, the most important thing was the question of the Northern Ireland border and how would that be dealt with under Brexit. Phase 2, which is going to take place from March 2018 to March 2019, when the divorce is final, the last day of March, whatever that is, 30 or 31, it's over. And what they're negotiating is how it's going to look, what it's going to look like. Phase 2, the principal thing they're going to discuss is what is the trade relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union after March 2019. How is that going to look? There's terminology that you'll hear throughout this presentation, and these are two important phrases. One is a soft Brexit. And a soft Brexit means that the United Kingdom would remain in the single market of the European Union. They would have certain controls over immigration and things like that, but trade-wise, they would remain in the European Union. There's a faction in the Conservative Party that supports that. The other is a hard Brexit. A hard Brexit means that they leave completely out of the single market, and they negotiate their own trade deals with different countries on a one-by-one basis. So there is quite a bit of support for that in the Conservative Party and in England itself. It's the old saying, in for a penny, in for a pound, and if you're going to go all the way. It's kind of an attitude that happens. The results, though, of the Brexit, the very close vote, they actually surprised all the people who took polls, all the pundits who were saying, it wasn't going to happen. Very similar to what happened in the election in this country in the same year. So people were a little bit bent out of shape, especially in places like London, where many young people didn't bother voting. They would not even think that this would ever happen. It seemed like such a crazy idea. But it did happen, and like I say, and within the Conservative Party, there's a real commitment to doing it, and it looks like there's no turning back. The only question is a soft or hard Brexit. Because of this setback, Cameron, the Prime Minister, he stepped down as leader of the Conservative Party because there was such chaos in the party. Theresa May became the Prime Minister. And she was convinced, talking to the Conservatives, that there was tremendous support for this in the country. Because they represent certain parts of the country where, you know, it's just similar to this country where, you know, you've got red states, blue states. The same thing is happening over there. So Theresa May made a tremendous political mistake in that she called a snap election. So we know in the parliamentary systems of Ireland and England, they have different rules than we do, and they can have an election, or an election can be forced on them by a lack of confidence and things like that. And she called a snap election for June 8th, 2017, where she was convinced she was going to get a mandate from the people to have a hard Brexit, and then she would be in a real position of power when she went to Brussels to negotiate for the UK. But there was a big, shocking surprise when the votes were counted. The Conservative Party lost 13 seats in Westminster. The Labour Party gained 29, which the Labour Party they thought was dead and buried with people that were leading it, Jeremy Corbyn especially, who was a real leftist, a Bernie Sanders kind of person, but they gained tremendously. But the outcome of the thing was that there was no ruling majority. In other words, in these parliaments, you've got to have some kind of a ruling party who's going to call the shots, or you have to have a coalition where two parties will come together, they'll form a majority and have their way. So on the same date of that snap election in Northern Ireland, the DUP, Democratic Unionist Party, won 10 seats in the Parliament in London, Westminster, which was one more than they had. Sinn Féin won 7 seats, which was 3 more than they had. But Sinn Féin abstains. They don't go to Westminster because they refuse to take an oath to the Queen. This is a long-standing policy. So the coalition was formed between the Conservative Party, the Tories in England, and the Democratic Unionist Party from Belfast, the DUP. And those 10 seats gave Theresa May a working majority. To sweeten the pot, Theresa May gave the government of Northern Ireland £1.4 billion for infrastructure and other improvements in the government. So we'd call it bribery, but over there this is called doing business. So I'm going to let that sit for a minute. I want to just touch back on the Good Friday Agreement and how that is affected by this Brexit. And then we'll get into more detail as to how it's affecting Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement, was signed on April 10, 1998. It was an agreement that was negotiated between all the parties, political parties in the north of Ireland at that time. It's called a multi-party agreement. And what the agreement was geared to do was to create a local government in the 6 counties of the north that would rule the counties. Before that, it was run from London. Okay, that had been true since 1972. There was never any local government in the north. And so the Good Friday Agreement made this, possible. It was, complicated, but it certainly made it possible. The Good Friday Agreement also made a certain amount of cooperation necessary between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom. There was very strong American influence over this agreement. Bill Clinton, well, no matter what you think about him, had quite a lot to do with making this peace process come about. George Mitchell was the former senator, and he was really a mediator and negotiated an awful lot of this. He still has a lot to say about what's going on in the north of Ireland. So all the parties, the multi-parties, agreed, except for one. The Democratic Unionist Party refused to participate in the agreement because they felt it was a sellout to Ireland and it was taking away the heritage of the Union's people. On May 22nd, 1998, there was a nationwide referendum, an island-wide referendum in the 6 counties and in the 26 counties. In Northern Ireland, 71% of the people approved the agreement, 29% opposed it, 81% participated in it. In the Republic, the vote was more about the cooperation between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. 96% of the people voted in favor of it. 56% actually voted. Now, the Good Friday Agreement was controversial then and is controversial today. It's still being argued over. It has never been fully implemented. A lot of things that were promised the nationalist parties haven't been agreed upon. But some of the very positive things that came out of it was that there are cross-border agencies. So now, since 1998, there are groups in the North and the South who work together on health, agriculture, a lot of things like that have developed. Decommissioning of the paramilitary organizations. That took a good number of years, but it happened. And violence is at a minimal compared to certainly what it was in the 70s and 80s. There was an early release of political prisoners. That was very controversial. It still is controversial. There is a thing called legacy issues, where people who suffered during the Troubles, as it was called, had a right to find out more about it. And that has never really been very successful, especially from the nationalist point of view. Theresa May, as a matter of fact, is submitting legislation that is going to make it illegal to have any investigations of soldiers or police during those years, because when they leave the EU, they're no longer bound by the European Commission of Human Rights. So that's a serious, serious thing. It also changed the Constitution of the Republic of Ireland. There were 2 articles, Articles 2 and 3, that said that Ireland, the country of Ireland, was the whole island. They had to change that and say it was the 26 counties, the 6 counties were something different. That was a very difficult argument, but it was agreed upon, like I said, by 96% of the people. It also set up a democratic procedure for how Northern Ireland would join the Republic of Ireland. There had to be a vote. There had to be a vote taken in the North, a vote taken in the South. They had to agree by a majority, and then you'd have one country. It sounded, I'll tell you, 3 years ago it sounded so far-fetched, but the thing has changed quite dramatically. Okay, but the Good Friday Agreement, the GFA, most importantly, it guaranteed that the border would be open and that people could go back and forth across the border. Now, the border goes back to the senseless and undemocratic partition in 1922. It's the craziest thing. It was gerrymandered so that only 6 of the 9 counties of Ulster were put in, so that there would always be a Protestant majority. The line doesn't go straight in any sense of the word or anything like that, and that is a very, very big problem when we look at Brexit, and we'll come to the details of that. But first, let's just talk about what is projected here for Ireland itself, the Republic. The European Union Parliament stated that Ireland would be the country most affected by Brexit. They estimated that a hard Brexit, that means leaving the single market, would cost Ireland 200 million euros in trade and 49,000 jobs over 6 years. The UK is the second biggest customer of Irish goods, and with a hard Brexit, a hard border, that would change dramatically. In the divorce proceedings, the Irish government had 2 key priorities. In phase 1, they wanted to have as seamless a border as possible. And in phase 2, they wanted to have no trade barriers. You know, they wanted a soft border, they wanted a soft Brexit. The Irish PM, Leo Varadkar, is optimistic that the financial sector in Dublin could benefit by Brexit when financial institutions from London have to leave because they're no longer in the EU. Like, this is tremendously ironic in that in 2010, the Irish government, in collusion with the Irish bankers, collapsed the whole economy, had to be bailed out by the EU at an enormous amount of money. And now they say, come on back. That's the way Irish politics goes, I guess. Here's what I think from what I studied, and this is a very, very complicated thing, about the implications for the north of Ireland, for the 6 counties, for Northern Ireland. And myself and Maria have been talking about this, and everywhere you look, everywhere you go on the internet, the same things are being said. I mean, this isn't Sinn Féin propaganda. This isn't DUP propaganda. This is, you know, not fake news. This is the real deal. So, on the Brexit referendum of June 23rd, 2016, that's when people in the UK voted 51 to 48 to leave. In Northern Ireland, the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, 55.8 voted to remain, 42% voted to leave, and 68% of the people voted. So that's a huge difference there. But despite that kind of a democratic choice, the DUP, Democratic Unionist Party, feels that the best thing for the 6 counties is to join with the UK when they leave. So there's no negotiating with this Arlene Foster, who's the head of the DUP at this time. And she's hell-bent on it, the DUP is hell-bent on it, and there's no consideration given to the will of the people or the vote of the people or anything like that. They're going to put their fortunes in with the United Kingdom, which is what they've always done. Like I said, the Good Friday Agreement gave freedom of movement on the border. Now, this is incredible. But the border is 310 miles long. In 1998, at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, there were 20 official border crossings. Every one was patrolled by the British and RUC. And where there were roads that crossed the border, where they didn't have an official border post, they would build a fence or they would blow up the road so that, you know, traffic couldn't go through. So if you were a farmer and you were bringing goods from one side of the border to the other, you could only go through these 20 places. The traffic jams were incredible, and the loss of money was, you know, outstanding. But 19 years later, like now, there are 275 border crossings. The whole thing has been opened up. People have property. Some of it's in the south, some of it's in the north. That's 275 now. Compare that to the United States and Canada. 3,987 miles and 119 border crossings. So you can see how the Good Friday Agreement, for whatever faults it had, opened up the economy between the North and the South. How much, you know, goodwill exists and everything like that is another question, but the economy has skyrocketed on the border. To the extent that cross-border trade between the North and the South, 35 million euros a year. 30,000 people cross the border every day for work. So, you know, you've got to tip your hat to something like that when we consider what the situation was like 25 years ago. But, as I said, phase 1 of the divorce proceeding was supposed to deal with the border. And the EU, the European Union, in their negotiations said the thing that makes the most sense is that the border should be in the Irish Sea. And that way, tariffs, customs, passport, and everything like that would take place at British ports and airports. And it would mean there would be a seamless border in Ireland. it would function as one country, part of the EU. But Theresa May, in the negotiations, her team said that she didn't want to have a hard border in the north, but she didn't want to have a border between Northern Ireland and the UK. So that was trying to be negotiated. The DUP went wild. They were going to withdraw their 10 seats of support because they feel that the best interest for them is to be in the UK. They want a border so that they are totally separate from that. The explanation given by Arlene Foster was that if they did that, if they put the line in the Irish Sea so that all the customs and tariffs were collected in Britain and not in Northern Ireland, then it would make it too easy for Northern Ireland to join Ireland and leave the United Kingdom, which is their whole motivation. You know, if it wasn't so real, it would be hilarious. But anyway, they have such real power over the conservatives that they can get away with this kind of thing, okay? The DUP also has a very complicated social program. What do they call it? It's social issues, like, you know? But anyway, they're all for the UK. They want to be part of the UK. They want to be called British. They blah, blah, blah. But they don't want marriage equality. Even though there's marriage equality in the Republic, there's marriage equality in the United Kingdom, but not in the North. Same with abortion. Same with climate change. They're against all of that stuff. You know, it's a remarkable situation. But when it comes down to their identity, their red, white, and blue flag, they're all for the United Kingdom. The American Brexit Committee, which is a group that's formed about a year and a half ago, Marie's going to give a lot more details of that when she gets up here. This is what they said. A hard border means imposition of tariffs, less foreign direct investment, increased border security, custom controls, passport and visa checks, reduced EU structural funds, and farm grants. But a soft border is another problem. This is from the Irish Times, November 30th, 2017. But the EU has a common market. There are thousands of food standards, safety regulations, and tariffs that could be threatened by an open border with a non-EU member. And that's what a soft border would do. And like I said, I'm not an economist. I don't know too much about this, but to read about it is fascinating. I never had any idea of this, but this is true. Guinness Brewery is in Dublin. They brew the beer in Dublin. They put it in tankers. They drive it to Belfast. In Belfast, it's put in cans and bottles. It's driven back to Dublin and then shipped overseas. So that would be dramatically affected by a border where you had to, cross and have customs and things like that. This is a real example. In Tyrone, in the north, there's certain parts of Tyrone that are famous for chicken farms. They raise so many chickens that they can't sell them all in the north, and they actually, many of them are sent to Dublin where they're shipped to Europe, and chicken food, But there are EU regulations where when the chickens are killed, there's a certain way you have to do it. When you transport them, the trucks have to have certain kind of cleaning procedures and everything like that. When you get to Dublin, you got to have a certain kind of way to unload it. If there's a Brexit, a hard Brexit, those chickens would be under different kind of standards that whatever standards the UK decides. This has caused chaos, this has caused controversy all over the EU because the French farmers are saying, we have to clean the trucks this way and they won't have to, and they can sell cheaper chickens and we're going to go out of business. That's the nature of the whole controversy. Now, I don't pretend to understand all of it, but you can see the argument, where if you've got different standards all of a sudden in one market. I mentioned just briefly about the EU funding certain things. The EU has tremendous investment in Northern Ireland ever since the Good Friday Agreement. They have funded cross-community things for years and years and years to try to have justice brought about in reconciliation. I have a friend, a guy named Brendan Clark, who worked over there. He was never in prison. He was an active, participant in the struggle. He was never a prisoner. But he got a job through this EU funding where he worked on cross-community. He's from the Ardougne, and he worked with the Shankill area on, bringing people together across this line. And he did something fascinating because there are walls that separate this. And he had a campaign called Tear Down These Walls. And he showed the, hypocrisy of walls and everything like that. But one of the most incredible things he did was he filmed, at the wall, he filmed the Catholic side of the street, and then he went on the other side and he filmed the Protestant side of the street, and then he showed the movie, to the people on the other side who have never seen what the other side of the street looks like, because the wall's been there since 1973. But he lost his job because the EU pulled out the funding because of Brexit. So he's a 61-year-old guy. He's, it's hard to get a job when you're 61. And he's just a friend. We stay at his house when we go there. But that's being duplicated all over the North with the withdrawal of the funds. I just want to wind up with two quick things. Northern Ireland right now doesn't have a government. It's been a year. The last day of January is a year that the government collapsed when Sinn Féin pulled out over a corruption scandal. I don't have time to go into all the details, but it's very, very unfortunate that the DUP and Sinn Féin can't get together and establish a government as these negotiations are going on, etc. There's a good number of reasons, but I'm going on too long here, and I want to get Marie up. Marie is going to talk about American activism and what can be done by people like us to help this situation. As Irish Americans or as Americans, what can we contribute to seeing that this tragedy doesn't take place in Ireland or especially in the North? Just some quick local history. In the 1980s, there was a campaign that was started called the McBride Principles. And what the McBride Principles did was insist that investments of American money would not be invested in companies that had unfair hiring practices. And at that time in the 80s, it was incredible, the discrimination against Catholics in hiring. It was horrific. It was something we can't even imagine in this country, but it existed. But the McBride Principles came in and played a part, and there were people right here, like guys like us, John McNulty, Frank McCabe, Al McAloon, Bob Whitaker. They went down to the State House and they started arguing with the people and saying, we want to take all the retirement money on the teachers and state workers out of any investment where they're not doing that. And there's a flyer over here, you can read it later, and it was a successful thing. It was a really, really thing that affected people over there. Myself and Nancy, we were over in the North this fall, and we had some time in Derry. We were down on the bog side walking around, and we stumbled on the Free Derry Museum, which I highly recommend. It's a tremendous, tremendous exhibit. But there was a man came up and he said, "Oh, I'll be a tour guide." And we said, "Oh, we can walk around." He said, "No, no." We said, "Well, we're from the States and we were in Irish Northern Aid." Right away he said the greatest thing that ever happened was the McBride Principles in Derry, because money was drawn out and they realized they had to start hiring Catholics. So I'm just saying that it's a role to play. Bobby Sands says everyone has a role to play, and I think we can do that. And I'm sorry, it went on a little too long, but we're going to have questions and answers at the end of this. But Marie has some real important things to say about lobbying.
I want to start with my prop, which all speakers know you need to have a prop. And 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, I moved all the way from Ashley, Rhode Island, up here to Princeton. And I was in an Irish group down there, and so I started coming up here, hanging out. I met the Benz sisters. I met so many, almost everybody in here. It's been wonderful. And I heard about the 1960, so I said, okay, I'll go. And got involved. I helped out. We did a lot of fundraising and learned so much about these people, what they did, and was really excited about building the monument that was put up down there. I just couldn't believe it. You know, my grandmother came over, and we never knew anything growing up. Like most of you Irish relatives, they didn't talk about it. So I got to learn a lot about it and, you know, have real feelings for them. And when I think Sean usually plays this song, Grace, brings tears to my eyes. It's like, oh my God, it's so sad. But it made me think, well, now, what can I do? We built the monument, and now this opportunity has come for maybe we can do something. So another part of my story, and then I'll get off of it, is I fell into the best job. When I came up here, I was working for the homeless, and that closed, and I saw online this job for Congressman Cicilline, and it wanted to be a veterans case manager, and I said, yeah, I can do that, and I went in and I got the job. Never had anything to do with politics. I always liked, you know, Cicilline, but I didn't know anything about it. I thought they were all liars. But he's not. I have to tell you, he's the real deal. I've had a couple of situations with him where people have had meetings with the congressman, and so we have to do a little bit of homework and, you know, like educate him about it, and then people come in and talk to him. And this Friday, Jim and I, and maybe one or two other people, we have a meeting with him, and we're going to go in and we're going to talk to him about this, because what's happening is, before, the United Kingdom was given the idea that as a part of their Brexit, that the United States would support them economically, like, yeah, we'll still trade with you, and we'll still do this, and we'll still do that. So it makes the parting of the United Kingdom from the EU a little bit easier. They're not going to lose so much money. But what it's going to do to Northern Ireland is, I didn't find anything. I've got so much stuff. Anything that was positive, except maybe the banks in London will come to Ireland. But like Jim said, you know, I don't think they're going to do that. So what I have suggested that we do is have a letter writing campaign and a telephone writing campaign with the congressmen and the senators, pushing for the United States to take a close look at what's going to happen to our people in Northern Ireland, who, by the way, 22% of the people in Northern Ireland live in poverty, and just make them aware that this is something that we're interested in, that we're very interested in. We're voting. There's going to be some elections this year. So I put together a letter, and all you have to do is write the name of the person you're going to send it to and sign your name. And then I've also got a telephone script where the names, the phone numbers, and then you call and you just say what's on this. And I want to tell you, honestly, it makes a difference. One of my jobs is I answer the phone, and on Monday mornings I check the voicemail. And so if you were to call in, and like this immigration is a pretty big issue right now, and you leave your name, or you don't leave your name, we have a system where we put everything in that people say. Like they'll call up and say, you know, impeach Trump, okay? That's something. So we'll type it in, go up, and then these issues will populate. Impeach Trump, immigration, DACA, and we click it. And so at the end of the week, they go in and they say, all right, what's on people's mind? And if people would call their senators, their congressmen, if they would send them letters, it's going to bring it up on the radar and make them aware that there are people, there are voters that are interested in this issue, and it will make a difference. I've seen it happen before when he talked about the McBride thing. There's been other issues where maybe something is, you know, we don't really know about it, and then 30 people will call. And when they call and they leave their messages, they say the same thing. You know they're reading from a script, but it still counts. It doesn't matter that you're not using flowery different words. And there's an issue that's coming up now, and I know within the next 2 weeks everybody's going to hear about it. I'm not going to say what it is, but something's happening, and there's a group out there, and they're making it happen with phone calls, with emails with the letters. All the senators and congressmen, they all have email addresses. But the thing that makes the most impact is a letter in the mail. If you take enough time, they gotta open it up, they gotta look at it, they gotta track it. So whatever you can do, I mean, it's something that we can do. Because I know myself, when I feel sorry for somebody, I'm like, oh, what can I do? That's what you can do, and it's very, very important. So that's my line, and really, I feel like what we did this last year when we raised the money for the monument, and we had the monument dedication, and then it was kind of over, and we had all gotten, so we liked each other, and we were interested. Don Degnan would talk, and then Jim would talk, and I can't remember your name, but those two over there. Pat and Rebecca. There was a lot of people, and I'm missing some names, would come up and do some talking, and then when Jim brought, we had a couple of things scheduled, and we'll still do them sometime, but when Jim started talking about this, and then we all kind of started going online, all of us were like, we got to talk about this, because 1916, those people, they sacrificed, the women, all that stuff. This is what we can do. We don't have to pick up a gun, pick up a pen, or the phone. So I really want to encourage you to do that. I have letters. If you want to make copies yourself, if you want to take 10 copies, we got loads of them, and the list with the congressman's name on it, and the little speech that you make. It's very short. Okay? So that's my appeal. Thank you.
I just wonder if there are any questions, but before that, I should have said this before, but the next meeting of the 1916 committee is going to be Monday night, right here downstairs though, huh? Okay, so we had to change it. We usually have it at Patrick's Pub. There's dots over there. It's just a lot of confusion. So we will continue this conversation Monday night. We'll also continue the conversation about what other presentations we might want to have. We're going to have one at the end of February. Everyone's welcome to participate. There's nothing to, hold you back. And we have a good time once the meeting is over. Are there any questions about any of this stuff? Yes?
Jim, because I know so little about the entire issue, it always strikes me, I guess maybe from an emotional underline, is did people of Northern Ireland consider themselves Irish or English? Because their fealty is to the English Ireland, Scotland, to that island per se, and they call themselves Irish, but they don't seem to have a feel to where they live.
Yeah, well, that's a complicated issue.
Hey, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, do the people in the north of Ireland consider themselves Irish or British? And that there's this divided loyalty. I mean, there's a divided loyalty in that the population has been divided. Don, what is the word in the phrase in the proclamation, divided by?
A foreign government.
Yeah, so I mean, this has been consciously done to separate these people. And but an interesting thing about this presentation was how many people in the North voted to stay in the European Union. That was remarkable. And many of them were Protestant loyalist farmers because that's in their economic interest. Money always talks in that direction, we say, that's for sure. Yeah.
Can I just add something myself?
Sure.
Part of the Good Friday Agreement was that the people of Northern Ireland could consider themselves British, Irish, or both. So people in the north of Ireland can hold passports from both countries.
Right.
Some do. Some only have an Irish. Some only have a British. Some do both. That's how it's been for 20 years.
Yeah. And since this Brexit vote, there's been a flood of people getting the EU passport in the north because they want to be able to travel without, hesitation. Yeah, Pat.
Is this the last shot, Jim?
At United Ireland.
United Ireland?
I think, you never run out of chances until you start taking them. But this is something I'm surprised. I'm really surprised. I never thought 5 years ago we'd be talking like this. Donna.
Jim, I would point out that you're absolutely right about the vote
in the north of Ireland. The same thing was true in terms of Brexit in Scotland. 55% of the electorate in Scotland voted to stay in. So what this really is, what the Brexit vote really was, it showed up the divisions within Britain itself. The majority of people in England and Wales voted to leave the EU. The majority of voters in both the north of Ireland and Scotland voted by a large plurality to stay in. So there are really very deep divisions within Britain itself over Brexit, not just in Northern Ireland.
Right. And a crazy part of the whole thing is that the negotiations that are going on are being conducted by the Conservative Party. It's not like there's coalitions of Labour and Green Party and Alliance Party or anything like that. And you know, it sets up a situation where there is a certain percentage of people whose voices are unrecognized. And but there's still this question of what's going to happen with the border and what's going to happen with a hard or soft Brexit. You know, our man Trump promised them when they voted Brexit, he said, oh, that's great, we're going to give you a great deal, a great trade deal, like he's going to help them out. But there is time for us to, like Maria's saying, you know, to make our voices heard to whatever extent we can and whatever it's worth or anything like that. But this is not over, you know, until March of 2019. And so a lot can happen, and pressure from the American government is always responded to well in London. So, yeah, Nancy.
So, by the Sinn Féin pulling out of the North, the government there, is that giving the DUP more power?
Well, the DUP had a lot of power because they formed this coalition government. But what's going on in Stormont, the Belfast government, is, in my mind, a tragedy. But I understand, you know, there's principled people in Sinn Féin and they don't want to sit down with people who are not recognizing the Irish language, they're not recognizing marriage equality. There's a number of other issues that are dividing them, and the DUP doesn't budge because they have this power now in London. Yep, Mike?
Did we think that would change the election when we were involved with Ariane stepping down?
Yeah, see, there are never-ending elections over there, and so there's another one in February, is it?
Yeah.
Mike, February? All right, I thought it was a little bit later, but, you know, and so Adams has resigned as president, Mary Lou McDonald came in Sinn Féin. But it's important to understand is Sinn Féin doesn't have the kind of power that they're going to get their way, and there's still a whole lot of people that are going to oppose them. But there's no question that they're getting more and more popular support both north and south. There's no denying that. Okay, before, oh yeah, Kath.
Representing the Gaelic Club, I'd like to thank Marie for coming tonight to present this lecture. It was part of a series on Friday night. We have a raffle here where the proceeds go to the Gaelic Club, but that helps out with the music downstairs because we try a lot of times to schedule music downstairs with the lecture. So Sean Powell's downstairs, everyone's welcome to go downstairs and try the music. We have hot coffee and tea and obviously pastry down there too.
One last thing, there's a lot of literature up here that people can take. The American Brexit Committee, which I'm a part of, has frequently asked questions. Marie has the template and everything like that. I'll move this other stuff over there, but thank you everybody for coming. And oh, if anybody here is not on our mailing list, the 1916 email list, Mavis back here has a clipboard. You can sign up and you'll get notifications of all that we're doing. Buy those raffle tickets.
Yes. Yourself.
I
did she do?
Yeah.
You gonna give me a good grade?
Yes, I will. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Stuff there. Never heard.
Yeah, I had no idea about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Have the knowledge, and you get into the, you know.
What I probably should have said. Well, after I was just like, right. Oh, yeah. Oh. Thank you. You're welcome. Oh, wait, no, 1960.